Tuesday, May 12th. So this week in science, here's the plan. We're going to continue talking about inherited traits, characteristics that we get from our parents. But also we're going to talk this week about how our environment can also influence or change the traits that you see. So let me give you a quick refresher on traits if you're feeling a little bit lost after 2 weeks of no science. So let me show you a picture of my dog. Her name's Ruby. And to show you what traits are, let's look at this picture of Ruby. Remember that traits are characteristics or things that we can observe about an animal, a plant, or the people around you that tells us something about them. So what are some of the things that you notice about Ruby by looking at her picture? A few of the things that I notice are her black hair and the fact that it's curly. Some dogs don't have curly hair like that. Her skinny but really strong legs. I don't know how much you can see from that picture. She has like brown or black, like dark eyes, it looks like. And she has big floppy ears that go downward. So those are just some of the things that I notice. You might notice a bunch of other things about my dog, and all of these things are traits. So now that we've covered traits, let's talk more about how these traits can be different depending on what environment we are in. But first, we gotta talk about a mysterious thing called genes. No, not that kind of genes. Get that out of your head. These genes. Genes are basically the bits of information that are passed down from our parents that make us who we are. So think about this for a second. You're all growing pretty fast right now because you're at the age where children are growing and changing pretty quickly. Now when you're sitting there right now, are you thinking about growing and getting stronger and bigger? Not really, right? You don't have to sit there and think about growing. And the reason why is because all that information is stored in your genes, so you don't have to think about it. So genes are basically what makes us who we are. And those things are taken from our parents. Let me show you this picture about how genes sort of work to make you who you are. So obviously your parents probably look a little bit different. What happens when they have kids is that their genes are sort of mixed together and they produce you. So you get both the genes from your mom and your dad, and you become a unique individual with a unique set of genes. And if you look at this picture here, you can see that that glass is a little bit darker than tonic water would be, but a little bit lighter than what Pepsi would be. And even though it's kind of a simplified example, it's a good example of how you're really a mix between both your parents. So now that we've done a little refresher on inherited traits, now we can start talking about the environment. And the question to get us going today that I'm really curious about is why in the winter do some trees keep their leaves and others drop them on the ground and get rid of their leaves? And we are kind of just coming out of winter now, so the trees are starting to regrow their leaves. And here's a picture of a tree close to my house that you can see the budding leaves coming out of the tree. And they're still smaller than they will be in summer, but they're growing and growing. So think about it. And the hint here is that it's both the environment that the trees are in and also the inherited traits of the trees that create this difference. So here's the phenomenon that we're focusing on now, and that we're going to come back at the end of the lesson and see if we can better understand this phenomenon. And remember that a phenomenon is just something that happens that we can try to use science to explain. So let's take a quick look at this video here. So by wintertime, some trees have lost all of their leaves, while some stay green all year. So what questions do you have about what's going on here? And again, you don't need to write these questions anywhere. Just think about it. So after thinking about this situation, that in the winter, some trees lose their leaves and some trees don't lose their leaves. What are some potential reasons, or what are some ideas that you have about why this might be the case? And this is where you can write down your answers in Google Classroom. And there are no right or wrong answers at this time. I just want you to use what you know already to try to come up with a reason why this happens. And if you have no idea, just make a good educated guess and be creative. All right, so let's review a little bit. Let's think back to what we already know. And here we have a paragraph that has a bunch of missing words, and most of these are the vocabulary words that we're learning during this lesson and during this unit. So first, let's read the directions. It says, read the paragraph below. Figure out which vocabulary term fits in each blank. So when we do this, we know we're only going to use each term one time. So we've got to be a little careful about where we put each answer, because if we get one wrong, it could kind of mess up the rest of our answers. And with this, you can follow along in Google Classroom with me, and it'll be really simple because we can do this activity together. So it says, a blank is a group of living things of the same kind. And we have environment, species, offspring, inherited, traits, and genes. So actually, our skills in English and what we learn in CKLA can actually help us a little bit here in science, because what we're probably looking for is a person, place, or thing. Basically a noun, because it says a blank, which means we're looking for a person, or place, or thing. So we have a few options. It looks like environment is a person, place, or thing. Species is a person, place, or thing. Offspring, traits, and genes look also like they're nouns, so we can keep those. Inherited, though, that is an adjective, so we know that's probably not the answer. Because if we said a inherited is a group of living things of the same kind, it doesn't really make sense. So now let's think of which one of these means a group of living things of the same kind. It basically gives us the definition of the word. And back last week, we learned about how a species is actually a group of living things of the same kind. So we know that all humans, for example, are the same species, which means pretty much we're all the same, despite some small differences between us. So let's put that there, and if we think we made a mistake, then we'll go back and change it. Then it says, parents produce blank of the same kind. Parents produce. So remember we talked about how offspring is another word for babies or children? So it makes a lot of sense if we say parents produce offspring, or parents produce babies of the same kind. That makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it does to you, but that's what I think. And then it says, young plants and animals often share blank or characteristics with their parents. So every time when you're reading something and there's two commas and it says or blank, it basically means that it's giving you a synonym for that word, or a word that means the same exact thing. So we're looking for a word that means characteristics. And the only word here that I see that really means characteristics is the word traits. Basically, they're the same thing. Remember, traits are things that we can see on a plant or animal and that we can observe and that make them unique. So then it says they might have a fur color similar to their parents or have leaves that are shaped in a similar way. This is because blank information is passed from parents to their young. So in this one, it looks like we're going to need an adjective, because this word here is going to describe the information that they're talking about that's passed down from parents to their young. So the only word that really makes sense here is inherited, because that's what that word means. It means something that comes from parents and is passed along to children. And the way that that's passed is through genes, which we just learned about. However, organisms of the same kind don't look identical, right? You don't look exactly like your brothers or sisters. You probably don't look exactly like your mom or dad, unless you happen to be a identical twin with your brother or sister, which is kind of rare. And organisms can gain or lose traits over their lifetimes. This is because some traits are not passed on from parents. These traits are caused by the, and look, we only have one more left, and it makes complete sense. Nice job. And let's check our answers on that, see how we did. Check, 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 check. That's 100. Nice job, guys. So if you put all those same answers in Google Classroom, you're also going to get 100 on that part. So let's look at another real-life example about how traits can be different from two things of the same exact species. So these are actually both pictures of roses. And they look really, really different and have way different traits. So what do you notice about how these things are different? Maybe you're looking at the color, and the color is different. That's the most obvious thing to me. Actually, the shape of the petals is also a little different too. These look like they're dry and kind of wilted, which means they're dried up, kind of crinkling up. And it doesn't have this cool, like typical flower shape with the spiral rose. It's kind of like the petals are all fallen down. And then the leaves and the stems look pretty much the same, but they're just brown. So which rose do you think is healthiest? Exactly. The rose that's healthiest is this one with all the color and the green leaves. So the real question is, what happened to make these roses look really different? So do you have any guesses about what could have happened? So wow, we've got our first flowchart. For flowchart, you read it from top to bottom. And the stuff at the top usually means it causes the things at the bottom, or it happens first. So right here, the parents, it says parent A and parent B. They look a little bit different, but they had an offspring, kind of like mixed their genes together, and now it produced offspring A and B. And look, they look actually very similar. So it looks like they got some inherited traits from their parents. What sort of things do you see that are the same between the parents and the offspring? And yeah, color is a really good example. Parent A and parent B are both kind of red. The offspring are both red. The shape of the offspring are a little different than the parent, but it might just mean that they're younger and that they're gonna look like their parents later. And they have green stems just like their parents. Those are the things that I notice, but you can pick your own things. So here, our flow chart continues. So it looks like we have the same thing on top, and then look what happens. So we see that the inherited traits are pretty much the same between both roses. And then they live in two different environments, though. So what do you see in the yellow boxes? What do the words say? Yeah, it looks like this green one has warm temperatures, and it looks like this brown one is cold with icy frost. And then you can see how the leaves look different. So right here, these pictures are still pictures of these same roses, but because they are in different environments, guess what? They start to look a little bit different. And wow, we have our last part of our flowchart here, and we're still reading it from top to bottom. So remember, it looks like the inheritance or inherited traits are the same. They got the same genes from mom and dad. Their environments are different, and guess what? Their final appearance, about what they look like, what do you notice about that? Yeah, they're way different. Now, why did the two offspring end up being different colors? And remember, there are two possible answers. Is it because of the traits that they got? Did they get different traits from mom and dad?
Or was it because the environment between the two roses was different? Exactly. It looks like in this case, the environment was the thing that made one rose look really healthy and another rose look kind of dead, or at least really sick. So it looks like roses really like warm temperatures, and they do not like cold with icy frost, and they're going to have a lot more trouble in those conditions. So because we took a long time with the roses, I'm going to make this one really quick. These two pigs are actually siblings. They have the same parents. So what do you notice about the two pictures? What are some of the differences between the pigs? And one of the differences that I see is the color. This one looks way more pink than this one. This one looks a little bit pink, but it looks more white. But this number here in the bottom, that's the biggest difference between these two pigs. One weighs 75 kilograms, which is a measure of weight. And this one is 100 kilograms. So even if you don't use kilograms all the time, we know that this one is way bigger than this one. What are some of the reasons why one pig might be bigger than the other if they are siblings? And always when you're thinking about this question, think about inherited genes and think about environment. So probably the best explanation for this is that one pig probably got fed way more than the other pig, and that's why it weighs way more than the other one. Another quick thing about these pigs, the color of their skin and their hair, that is most likely an inherited trait. So eating a lot of food probably won't change your pigment color in your skin, but it does change your weight. So I'm guessing that those color differences are just a different mix of genes that these pigs got from their parents, which is a really important thing to understand. Siblings are not identical. They're not going to be the exact same. Some of the differences between you and your brothers or sisters, or you and your parents, are going to be completely natural. It's normal for you not to look exactly like your brother or your sister, or for two baby pigs to look exactly the same. All right, so let's go back to our original question. Why in the world do some trees lose their leaves in the winter and other trees stay green all year long? And that's a question that, guess what, I didn't even know before I started learning about this stuff. And so the two things we've been learning about, the environment and inherited genes that come from parents, those are both still the really important things to focus on with this question. So it looks like here that the environment between all these trees is pretty much the same. So if the environment is the exact same, what does that tell you about their inherited traits? Because we know they're different kinds of trees. Well, actually, we don't know that. We know they look different to us. One has leaves and one doesn't, but we know their environment is the exact same. So is the environment the best explanation of why some trees lose leaves and some don't? Not really, right? The best explanation is because they have different sets of inherited traits. So the trees that have leaves and the trees that don't have leaves in the winter, they come from completely different sets of species with different genes that determine what they look like. And it turns out the scientific explanation for this is that evergreen trees, or the ones that stay green all year, they're really good at holding on to water or moisture, which is one of the really important things that trees need to grow, in addition to sunlight. But the other kinds of trees are called deciduous trees. And those trees aren't as good at holding on to water as the evergreen trees are. And for that reason, when it gets cold and snowy and it rains less often and it's harder to pull moisture out of the ground, they save up their water over the winter by closing up the holes that connect their leaves to the branches. And after those holes close up, those leaves start to die and they fall down to the ground. And that's the tree's way of saving water, basically, which I think is very interesting.
And make sure to share what you learned today. Before we started this lesson, I had no idea why certain trees dropped their leaves and certain trees kept them. And now we know a little bit more. So spread the knowledge. Teach someone in your house about what you learned today, and also ask them if they know anything else about how this phenomenon works, because we can always learn more from other people. So with that, I will see you in a couple days for our next science class. Have an awesome day, and let me know if you need any help.